So yesterday, the United States kicked off Operation Economic Outcast, which administration officials have called the economic D-Day for Iran. Overall, the response was meh, with some in Iran even saying that this is just another empty threat by President Trump. In fact, when asked why these sanctions weren't going into place right now, Secretary Bessent said, quote, "Why would I want to blow up the global financial system?" Which, may be an indication of how far we're willing or not willing to take this. So just a few weeks ago, we shifted to an economic rather than military focus to end the war in Iran. But as of right now, there are some pretty important details that are missing. For instance, we don't know who is or isn't going to be sanctioned. We don't know when those sanctions will start, and we don't know how long they'll go on. Minor details. Now, in terms of what we do know, 2 days ago, Secretary Bessent wrote an article in the Financial Times comparing this to D-Day, the storming of Normandy beaches back in 1944. I think this is a little bit cringe, but anyways, we'll get into it. He said, "At dawn begins an economic D-Day, the single greatest financial offensive ever marshaled against an adversary. As a great wave of American resolve comes ashore, are Iran's enablers willing to wager their future against it?" Again, this is sanctions. Come on. I feel like we don't need to give a military speech and hype it up to the Allied landings in World War II to free Europe from Nazi Germany as a comparison here. All right. Either way, the announcement was made. Secretary Bessent got up and gave his speech. He answered some questions. And then we've seen a lot of folks kind of opine on this in recent days. The Wall Street Journal had a couple different assessments here that I wanted to share. First off, they said Bessent said that the United States was sanctioning more than 60 different entities, individuals, and vessels across the world that enable the regime to procure nuclear and missile technology, earn revenue from oil, and carry out cyber operations. Overall, my big takeaway here, and keep in mind this is coming from not an economist, so take it with a grain of salt, this sounded like the concept of a plan. Like, here's what we're getting ready to do, and we have warned all of the necessary parties. There were a couple sanctions that actually went into place yesterday, but they were very minor, almost more like housekeeping, cleaning some things up than having any real impact. By and large, yesterday's announcement was Secretary Bessent saying, we're going after everyone. There's not going to be any leakage, but we're not going to say exactly who we are or aren't going after. In fact, he said that every one of these parties is going to have a period of time to make things right. As in, will you resolve this on your own without the United States having to get involved? One term that was actually used that I think is important, so we've got this hype that it's going to be D-Day, and yesterday, the walls are coming down. Secretary Bessent, in his announcement, actually referred to this as a warning shot. So I don't know that we need all that buildup to announce a warning shot, but either way, that's a personal opinion. The Wall Street Journal continued, saying unmentioned in Scott Bessent's speech announcing Operation Economic Outcast was the country that has enabled Iran to withstand years of American pressure, China. Daniel Fried, a former U.S. diplomat now at the Atlantic Council, said, quote, "The rhetoric was ferocious, but the punch less so. Dealing a crippling blow to Iran's economy would probably require taking on big Chinese firms and banks." And the Wall Street Journal added that whether Chinese banks and refineries judge Bessent's threats as credible will be critical to this new operation. And the best take that I've seen on this so far is it's not a complete backing out, or taco as the term has been used recently, but it's also not economic D-Day. It's something in the middle, because if we actually see through on some of these threats and actually follow what Secretary Bessent is saying and do these things across the board and don't leave anybody exempt, Russia or China, it will be significant. But we haven't done that yet. So as of now, it is still just a threat. In fact, there was one reporter right up front that asked, I think, a great question. It's probably on everyone's mind. It was on my mind as this was coming together. He said, hey, why are you calling this D-Day when it sounds more like you're announcing plans and a timeline? That's not what happened back in 1944. Here you go.
You described this as an economic D-Day, but D-Day wasn't a threat of an invasion, and the U.S. didn't give a timeline to Germany. So why not impose the sanctions today?
Well, we are giving everyone the opportunity to remedy bad behavior. Why would I want to blow up the global financial system? We believe that it is important to level set and give people a cure period, but they should know that that will move very quickly and that we are serious. Secondary sanctions are a very powerful tool, and we here at Treasury, this is Gene Lang, the Acting Undersecretary for Terrorism Finance, and in the Terrorism Finance Department and at OFAC, The reason we are able to use secondary sanctions is because we do not take their use lightly. So we believe that a warning shot and a level set of expectations is appropriate. And if people do not want to meet our expectations, then we expect, and they should expect, that will leave the dollar system. Okay? Thank you all.
Of course, there's that other little key component there where Secretary Bessent says he doesn't want to blow up the global financial system, which might be a bit of an indicator as to how far we're actually willing to take this. Now, we do sort of have an Iranian response. It's mixed all over the place. For one, they did fire on another ship in the Strait of Hormuz yesterday. But before getting into that, a quick thank you to the sponsor of today's video, Wild Alaskan. So I've learned that eating healthy is mostly a logistics issue. And what I mean by that is if you have to make 2 or 3 stops for ingredients on your way home from work and then cook for another 1 to 2 hours once you are home, that's probably not happening on a Tuesday night, right? I think most of us want something that is quick, healthy, and genuinely good without staring into the freezer hoping that some random assortment presents itself, which is why I partnered with today's sponsor, Wild Alaskan, which delivers premium wild-caught seafood to your door on your schedule. Now, each box comes with individually portioned vacuum-sealed fillets, which are really easy to prep for a quick meal at home. Now, the fish here is frozen straight from Alaskan waters, helping to lock in its freshness, texture, flavor, and key nutrients like omega-3s, and the de-thawing process, super fast and easy. It's seafood you can trust, no GMOs, antibiotics, or other additives. Every order also supports sustainable harvesting practices and Alaskan fishermen whose history is tied to that region. I mean, for me, having sockeye salmon, Pacific halibut, or Pacific cod ready means dinner is pretty well handled before I overthink it. And Wild Alaskan offers a 100% satisfaction and money-back guarantee, so you can try your first box risk-free. So go to wildalaskan.com/Preston for $35 off your first order of premium wild-caught seafood. That's wildalaskan.com/Preston for $35 off your first order. And thank you to Wild Alaskan for sponsoring today's video. Now, in terms of the Iranian response, the easiest one to point to here is they fired and struck a ship in the Strait of Hormuz shortly after Secretary Bessent's speech wrapped up. So there's one, kind of how they're taking it. And they made a lot of threats that they're going to expand operations should the United States and our allies, or even Iran's allies, get on board with some of these sanctions. But in terms of the ship struck, the UK MTO, the United Kingdom Maritime Trade Organization, said an oil tanker northeast of Oman was struck by an unknown projectile in the engine room. The crew of the vessel, which is disabled, is reported safe. That's the first strike on a commercial vessel in some time, just kind of driving home that the strait is not open. It's not safe, not by a long shot, even though there have been increased reports of more and more ships getting through. We are going to talk about that at the end of today's video. Now, Tasnim News cited a high-ranking Iranian source. So this is Iranian media citing an Iranian source, saying the economic pressure plan that Trump will soon announce is solely based on a design by his media team aimed at increasing psychological pressure on the Iranian people. In practice, the United States has done everything it can against the Iranian people, from initial and secondary sanctions to naval blockades and more. Yes and no, like the blockade, for instance, no doubt is having an impact, but it has a greater impact the longer that it's in place, right? So one day, it's not as effective as 1 week, 1 week not as effective as 1 month, 1 month not as effective as 1 year. So the blockade takes a long time. And of course, the big question here is, will the United States actually enforce some of these sanctions against China and some of these other entities that are allowing Iran to kind of bypass the current set of U.S. sanctions? The Tasnim News article continued by saying Trump's claims and media campaign over this period, such as targeting all infrastructure, targeting all bridges, and opening the Strait of Hormuz, have proven to the world that these are simply psychological operations, not concrete actions. I think that's kind of a fair assessment. I mean, Iran is gambling in the assumption that President Trump is constantly just bluffing, but that kind of has been the case for a while now. I mean, going back to when hostilities were still ongoing, before the Memorandum of Understanding was signed, even though that thing didn't last but a week, President Trump was very loudly making threats to, remember, Power Plant Day or Bridge Day, whatever that was, that we were going to completely destroy all Iranian civil infrastructure, and just one after the other, they haven't come to fruition. So it's not crazy that the Iranian leadership is looking at this saying, they're not actually going to do anything. We'll see. Now, Al Jazeera had an article the other day talking about what to expect should this go into place, and they cited a couple different Iranian officials. One, Mohsen Razei, the new secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, as saying, quote, "If the economic war continues, not a single drop of oil will be exported. neither through the Strait of Hormuz nor from anywhere else in the Persian Gulf. We'll see. Iran definitely has a lot of munitions still available. You're talking about kind of the nuclear option. There's got to be a better way for me to say that when we're talking about a war designed to stop Iran from pursuing a nuclear weapon, but that's kind of what it is. Like shutting everything down all at once is damaging to Iran, no doubt, is going to turn all of the US allies in the region even more against the Iranian actions, but they could pretty well still shut down all traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. The Army chief, Amir Hatami, told a group of commanders during a speech last Monday that their forces are prepared to fight for 10 to 20 generations if necessary, adding the only way to make the United States understand through a language of force that they cannot do what they intend in Iran and the Strait of Hormuz. And then Mohammed Makber, an advisor to the Iranian supreme leader, said Iran's response to this will be more decisive than ever. We've talked about this in a number of recent videos where a likely response from Iran is just escalating attacks against U.S. allies in the Gulf. So going after civilian infrastructure and oil and gas infrastructure in places like Kuwait, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Oman, UAE, and elsewhere. We've seen that before. That has likely prompted the United States to dial back attacks or at least not follow through on threats during the course of operations in recent months. So if you're Iran, you have to assume that that is on the table. Now, one of the main topics here is around the Strait of Hormuz, what's coming through, what isn't. And we've seen a number of reports in recent days that have painted a pretty rosy picture, suggesting, I saw one that said a 400% increase, and then somebody clarified and they said, well, it went from 1 ship to 4 ships. So technically, yes. But the issue here is, bottom line up front, some ships are getting through, not enough are getting through. And the United States made some claims a few days ago that a ton were getting through. And there's some pushback here from the tracking companies saying, we just don't see it yet. And this is a bit of an issue right now because it does kind of go to who has leverage as these negotiations continue. If the United States and Secretary Wright and his statement is accurate here, it would show that Iran is losing their leverage over the Strait of Hormuz and might be incentivized to come to some sort of deal. If we are exaggerating these numbers, it would suggest that we are doing that because we do not have the leverage that we want right now, and Iran might actually have the upper hand. So pretty significant that we've got a discrepancy here. The Wall Street Journal, and of course we'll have all of these articles linked in the description below, said Energy Secretary Chris Wright said last week the U.S. military had helped ship over 15 million barrels of crude and oil products out of the waterway last Tuesday. He put the average oil exports through the strait over a 7-day period at more than 8 million barrels a day. Earlier this month, Wright said the 7-day average stood at around 9 million barrels a day. The count from commercial ship trackers tells a different story. With estimates ranging from roughly 2 to 6 million barrels a day, industry figures on the amount of crude oil and oil products being loaded onto ships in the Persian Gulf delivered to buyers do not corroborate U.S. claims. They said the ultimate check on Washington's number is whether the barrels ultimately surface somewhere. Even if tankers disappear while crossing Hormuz, much of that oil should eventually show up in data on barrels unloaded to buyers or middlemen. But so far, the U.S. government claimed volumes are not showing up in other countries' import volumes. So we're kind of in a tough spot there. Like these trackers that do this for a living and have been doing this long before this war began are saying, we can't identify what you are saying as playing out anywhere. I am hopeful that the U.S. didn't just make up those claims because, again, it's not just a matter of kind of exaggerating or lying, to be blunt, but that would suggest that we're in a tougher spot than we actually are led to believe. So either way, I've seen a lot of conversation back and forth on the amount of ships getting through, the volume of oil getting through. The last that I've seen from reliable sources is you've got the government saying one thing and these trackers saying, maybe we just haven't seen any evidence to support that. So we wait. And I mean, maybe some of these additional secondary sanctions will come through, or maybe it ends up just being tough talk in the hopes that China and others decide to wind down their Iranian relationships themselves. That'd be nice. Unlikely, but that'd be nice. So we'll see. But in terms of how and when the Iran war actually wraps up, this right here, the economic pressure, is the approach that the United States is taking right now. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.